All right, everybody, good to see you. Welcome to Dharma Live Online. Good to be back from retreat and back in this digital space, which is actually pretty good. It's pretty good that we can do this. So I just wanted to start off this evening by zooming out and I just was realizing like it's already September. We started in January and I'm only on Right Livelihood. So it's taken whatever 9 or 10 months to get through the whole story of the Buddha, which is where we started, the Four Noble Tasks, the Four Truths, and the Eightfold Path. So as you probably have gathered, my plan was to try to do this exhaustively, and I think that I'm doing a pretty good job following my plan, because I think the richness of the stuff we're talking about is so hopefully apparent that it's not good to just rush through it. So I'm going to move to the next path factor, having said all that, and begin a discussion which could actually really take quite a long time. And so classically, what we would be talking about tonight would be right effort, the teachings of right effort, which is the beginning of the meditation path factor. So it only took us 10 months to get to meditation. And so there's a lot to be said here. So let's just kind of take it apart a little bit. So the Pali term that we get for right effort, the translation comes from this word sama vayama, which effort's probably okay, but I think really the better word would be application, maybe even endeavor. So in early discourse, sometimes they use this word sama padana, the four padanas, which means endeavors. And it's a really big ticket item because it's really like the whole application with the Buddha saying, this is how you liberate the mind, which is kind of the whole deal here. So when we look at the most basic definition of the path, the most basic definition of the path is to cultivate the skillful and to abandon the unskillful, or to abandon and overcome what's unwholesome and to cultivate the wholesome, is really the whole path, which is kind of a little bit ambiguous. Well, what does that mean? First of all, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, and how does one cultivate? So the four efforts, they're called. So basically, when you're talking about right effort, you always end up having a conversation on what are called the four great efforts, which is what I'll kind of get into those tonight, and we'll go through the four of them, and then we can go back in the next couple of weeks and kind of unpack them one at a time. So the other thing I think that's problematic is when you go to a meditation class, if you go to a Vipassana group or an insight group, or even if you go to an insight retreat at one of the big Spirit Rock IMS centers, when they talk about meditation, they talk a lot about concentration and they talk a lot about mindfulness. And which I think is sort of a bummer because we have three path factors that are dedicated to training the mind. We have effort, mindfulness, and concentration. And I think of the three, effort might be the most helpful one. So when people talk about mindfulness, or when they talk about meditation or insight meditation, Buddhist meditation, whatever you want to call it, the conversation really should begin with the four great efforts, because when we're dealing with our minds, which is largely what we're dealing with when we sit and we practice, the question is always like, well, what am I supposed to be doing with my mind? And I think the big emphasis is, well, you should be concentrating your mind. Concentrate on the breathing. Focus on the sensations of the in and out breath. When the mind wanders, bring the attention back. Kind of the development of concentration, which isn't wrong or bad, but what's the purpose of even doing that? Am I just trying to get good at following my breathing? How's that going to help me? So the four great efforts are really in four terms. It's trying to prevent, overcome, develop, and maintain. And I think you could reduce the entire path to this strategy: trying to prevent, trying to overcome, trying to develop, and to maintain. So that's not really effort, that's application. So in which way do I apply my mind? So if I have to cultivate something, I need to know what the application is. The application is these four. So what are we trying to prevent? So we're trying to prevent and overcome unwholesome, destructive forces in the mind. The big three would be greed, hatred, and confusion. But of course, we see that there's the 5 hindrances, there's the 14 unwholesome mental factors. How many lists, how many items do you want of unwholesomeness? Well, there's plenty of them, but we're really looking for greed, hatred, and confusion. So we're trying to prevent these things from arising in my mind. And then if they do, and I think largely for y'all who are on retreat, and largely the work that we do when we do sitting practice is we're trying to overcome. The word they actually use is abandon, which I think is actually a really great word. But I think overcome works good in an English lexicon. I think you can switch back and forth. We're trying to abandon greed or overcome greed. We're trying to abandon craving, aversion, restlessness, lethargy, and doubt, the classic 5 hindrances. And so we're trying to overcome those. So those are the first two. The first two deal with unwholesome, or what I would prefer to use the term destructive. I have destructive forces in my mind. I'm sure that you have recognized that you have destructive forces in your mind. And what you want to do in meditation is recognize those and overcome those. Pretty clear. The flip side of that is we also want to develop and to maintain constructive forces in the mind or wholesome mental states. Things like mindfulness, kindness, adaptability, openness, spaciousness, patience. There's a whole bunch of them. How many, there's a huge taxonomy of these terms. So the Buddha can get into very, very great precision on identifying different qualities of our minds. And so this is really great. This gives us a good sense. I remember when I learned these, I was like, I remember learning these late in my practice and going, why don't they should have taught this on the first morning at retreat number 1. This would have been really helpful. So then again, well, then how do you do this? Well, first of all, of course, now we have to talk about mindfulness. You cannot do any of the things I just said without awareness, or what we call mindfulness. So you can't overcome something that you can't identify or recognize, right? So we have to realize that the recognition aspect of mindfulness is crucial. So if I'm going to overcome destructive forces in my mind, first of all, I have to have a sense of what those are, and then I need to recognize them when they're happening. There's a lot of wanting in my mind. I'm wanting this, and I'm wanting that, and I'm wanting this person to do this, and I'm wanting this to happen today. I don't know. I had a lot of stuff today that I really wanted to happen. Some of it didn't happen, so I guess I'll deal with that tomorrow. But, there's this kind of really, really strong, we would say greed is a strong word, but there's that kind of wanting, needing, having to have qualities in the mind, which can kind of get us in a lot of trouble. So we have to have some degree of mindfulness if we're going to deal with these things. Now, the other thing that's interesting, if you look at, well, I'm trying to develop, a wholesome mental state. Well, there's a lot of debate on this, but I would choose to believe that mindfulness is actually a wholesome mental state. So that would be Dharma theory for sure. And much of the early discourse is that mindfulness is not this just kind of dry monitor watching, which a lot of times that we think of it, which isn't really right mindfulness or complete mindfulness. Sometimes I can be aware of a destructive force in my mind and actually be hanging out quite enjoying it. I can be caught up in greed and enjoying it. I can get caught up in jealousy or contempt. I can be thinking about somebody in the world who I don't like so much and wanting some bad things to happen to that person. And wouldn't it be all be better if this such and such a person wasn't around? And I can be very caught up in that, and I can actually be enjoying that. So we have to realize, again, when we get into this aspect of the mind, sometimes things that are destructive aren't necessarily unpleasant. And I think that it takes a lot of honesty for us to recognize things that we entertain, attitudes in our mind, contents of our mind, activities of our mind that are destructive that we kind of like. We don't want to put them down, talking shit about other people, gossiping, or these ways in which we, it's not bad or wrong. It's just not really that helpful. And, we don't, and we can also develop I mean, I spent a lot of my years trying to undermine and overcome all these mental activities that I had just kind of developed, maybe even a little bit on purpose. You know, we inherit these qualities of mind. So this is where the pleasure pain thing gets weird, because sometimes we can be doing things in our mind, we can be actually cultivating and developing unwholesome mental states in our mind on purpose and finding it to be enjoyable. Right? I don't really want to sit here and admit that, but I would be a liar if I said that it wasn't true. So, you know, again, we have to realize that this stuff is very complicated. And then we want to maintain those. And so when we, just to give you like a really good example, or maybe a simple example, is that when I sit for 20 minutes over here in the corner, one of the things that I'm trying to develop is mindfulness. Now, mindfulness would know that the mind state that I'm entertaining would be destructive. And mindfulness would say, you know, you might want to put your attention somewhere else. Maybe this isn't the best line of thinking for you to be entertaining right now. So when I sit for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 or whatever it is, I'm trying to recognize mindfulness as a state, as a quality of mind that I have right now. And it's really the two key characteristics are I'm present, I'm here, and I'm at ease. I don't want to say relaxed because I don't like that word, but I'm present and I'm not reacting to any of the stuff that's going on. And so that's a quality of mind. We could maybe just call it awareness, call it mindfulness. And so when I sit for 30, so then what I try to do for those 30 minutes is I try to just keep that going. I try to maintain that quality. And I have varying degrees of success still after all these years. And so there's value in that. There's a lot of value in that. And what happens is I kind of get, my mind wanders off, I get caught up in different things, and then I can kind of assess. So I think, and this is just good old left brain work, but I think it's important for all of us to consider what are what are your top 3 destructive mental states or qualities of mind that kind of get in the way, you know, other than craving and aversion, which are kind of obvious. So the other thing about it too that's interesting from the perspective of the third foundation of mindfulness, which is about being able to recognize mental states as being destructive or constructive or unwholesome or wholesome, is this is really hard too, I think, is I have to remember that I'm not bad or wrong for having the mental state, right? So the word self-honesty really, really pops in my mind here, because sometimes it can be hard to acknowledge that some of the shit that goes on in my head is just really not so good. Because I'm a Dharma teacher, I'm a Buddhist teacher, I'm supposed to be developing all these qualities of mind, and then I see hatred just in my mind, jealousy just in my mind, destructive fear, these kinds of things just kind of right there, I'm just chewing on them, right? And so when you think about one definition of meditation, just to zoom out, the Dalai Lama actually has interesting things to say about meditation. Actually, he never talks about meditation, which is a bummer, because I bet he's a fucking great meditation teacher. I would imagine he's got some pretty interesting ideas. But he talks about meditation as being a process of familiarizing oneself with all of the different qualities of our mind. So we can get a sense, we can get almost like, I would even maybe use the word taste. Anger's like this, fear's like this, jealousy is like this, generosity is like this. So we want to be able to recognize qualities of our mind and familiarize ourselves with these qualities of mind. Because if I don't recognize and I haven't familiarized with with my experience, when they arise, I kind of don't know anything about them. I just get confused. So you want to be familiar with your anger and your hatred and your fear and your loneliness and your guilt and your regret and your shame. I mean, we all have these qualities of mind. And if you don't know anything about them, then when they arise or they emerge, you're not really sure what to do, or you're not really sure what it is, and you're maybe likely to entertain it. Right? So when you think about these, mindfulness and the right effort application, they really, really need to be brought together. Really, really need to be brought together. And the big problem, of course, is this book. Some of you probably know this book, Analayo Satipatthana, kind of the Insight Bible these days. Satipatthana Sutta, the teachings on mindfulness. The problem, and I love the Satipatthana, and I think Analayo is great, but nowhere in the teachings of mindfulness do you see the great efforts even mentioned. So if you want to practice mindfulness and you pick up this book, which is actually a really hard book to read, you don't get that. So one of the reasons why I'm so keen and probably so maybe even obsessed with teaching the Eightfold Path as a meditative liberation process is that when you take one of the path factors, so let's just say when you take mindfulness out of the context of the Eightfold Path and you just look at it, when you remove a piece of the system from the whole, you don't really get the richness of how it's supposed to operate and everything else. You know, like if you take a carburetor out of an old car and look at it, and you maybe you could take the carburetor apart, you could build the carburetor, you know everything about a carburetor, but if you don't know how the carburetor or how it fits in the rest of the engine or the rest of the system, it's not really that helpful. You're not going to be able to do much with a carburetor, you know. And so that's the danger of teachers, I think, is they don't understand the Dharma as a system. So when I remove one piece of the system and I examine it thoroughly, I don't know how it fit into the rest. And this nowhere is this so true and so apparent than with effort and mindfulness. Now, if I look at the four great efforts and say, okay, mindfulness is trying to get me to do four things. It's trying to get me to prevent, trying to get me to overcome, trying to get me to develop, and trying to get me to maintain. Okay, now I know what to do with the mindfulness. Now I have these four foundations of mindfulness, which we'll talk about in the future. Now I know the application, right? And if you don't know the application, then mindfulness just becomes this kind of really watered down thing, which it's kind of become in our culture. Mindfulness is this word nobody really knows what it means. Everybody thinks they know what it means. It's part of the problem. You know, what am I got the mindfulness. What do I do with the mindfulness? Well, this is what you do with it. So you really want to, and you can do this. The other thing too is you can be doing this all the time. I mean, there's probably one of the things I think that's most helpful off of the cushion, which is 90% of my life, probably yours, is that it's in my best interest for sure to learn how to what my friend and teaching partner Cheryl Sleen calls fast mindfulness. Can I, as I move through my day, as I move through the world, can I have some ability to kind of just be tracking the quality of my mind? Right. And you really, if there's a skill you want, that's the one you want. You want to be able to always have a sense of what's going on in my mind right now. Because our sensory experience is so obsessed with the out there, we're not usually keeping an eye on our mind. We're keeping an eye on the world and our emails and our work and our job and our friends and our family and our culture and society and politics. And we're always preoccupied with what's going on in the world that needs to be different. You know, how can I change the world, or how can I get what I want? How can I avoid what I don't want? And if we're not watching the filter or the device that we're filtering that data through, we'll just be confused all the time, you know, because you're contributing to that. You're contributing to the worldview that you have moment to moment. So it's really good to be able to watch this, right? And the good thing is, like, most destructive forces in our mind that cause us really, because destructive forces in the mind are what lead to destructive behaviors. I'm sure you've figured that out by now. You know, so mind states lead to behavior. So if we can nip it in the bud, that's in our best interest. So we want to understand on a day-to-day, what are the kind of mental states, what are the destructive forces in my mind that kind of get me in trouble? And can I just start with those? Right? And you could like start with that tomorrow, and you probably already have a sense of what I'm talking about. And so then you really can change the whole paradigm, the whole trajectory of your life and your experience by keeping an eye on these. And also on the flip side, what are some of the good qualities in my mind that I appreciate? I'm sure you're all have some, there's probably some aspects of your mind that are working for you. Do you know what those are? You know, do you know how to better maintain those? Do you know how to cultivate those and bring them into a stronger sense of fruition? Maybe just a sense of ease. Maybe you have some ease in your life. You could better expand. Kindness, generosity, patience. It's not all big stuff. And sometimes it's just patience, being adaptive, being able to adapt to new conditions, being able to stay focused on your goals, but easily adapt how you get there. Maybe you're good at that. A lot of us don't actually, and this is sad actually, to say this makes me sad. And it was true for me for a long time, and I don't even know if I have it sorted out yet, but we don't typically know our positive attributes. We oftentimes don't know what we do well in our minds, in our psychological experience, or even in our emotional experience. Right. So really, if you look at it down the middle, what is it that I need to overcome? And what is it that I need to develop? And if I don't have a somewhat of a sense of that, then it's going to be really hard. Then mindfulness, then it becomes, well, mindfulness for what purpose? Right. And I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of times I can't tell you how many times I went and sat on my cushion. I was like, what the fuck am I supposed to be doing again? Just sit here, breathe. I don't know. What's the deal? And so the Buddha lays it out very clearly. There's a whole path factor. There's 4 great efforts. They're very, very specific. He's saying, when you sit down, this is what you do. Right? You cultivate, you overcome, and you cultivate. You're weeding the garden of the mind. And I have a garden outside, I'll tell you. And sometimes I go outside, I don't know which is a weed and which is a fruit. They kind of, that's the problem. They start looking similar. You're like, well, which is, is this a good grass? Because even crabgrass, which isn't good, looks like regular grass. If you don't know the difference, you don't know which one to seed and which one to pull. And so we need to know which ones to pull and which ones to feed. Otherwise, you can get this feeling that I've had a lot, and I don't like it, but you can get kind of stuck in your practice where you're kind of like, what was I doing again? You can kind of get in these plateaus that feel like they're kind of not going anywhere. Like you get to the point where you can sit for 30 minutes and you can mostly handle it, not a big deal. But after a couple of years, you're like, okay, like I can do this for 30 minutes, but what the fuck? And so I think this is a great reminder, and this is not some unique teaching that I've sort of pulled out of this is really front and center. This is like Dharma 101. And this is really what we're after. And so and there's a lot of different qualities that we can talk about, but tonight I thought we would do, for terms of practice, is I think starting at the beginning, which I think is a good idea. And whether you agree or don't agree, you can kind of figure it out on your own. But I do believe wholeheartedly that mindfulness is a wholesome mental state. Mindfulness is constructive. It's wholesome. It has metta in it. It's not just this watching, monitoring business. It's actually a little bit of an engagement. So again, I bring in that quality. It's not just being present, which is generally how the meditation mindfulness culture teaches it. Just be present. That's only maybe half. You be present, and then you're at ease with what you're present to. So you're at ease with the body. You're at ease with the emotion. You're trying to see that mindfulness is actually, in many ways, it's a relationship to the present time experience. Right. And I think what we get out of that, Kinchana Weber coined this phrase, and I think it's fabulous. He says that mindfulness, a Dharma practice, is about having an intelligent relationship to your experience. Right. That means I'm intelligent. I have a sense of what's going on. I have a relationship with what's going on. I have a harmless attitude about what's going on. Right. And then so what we'll do here is we'll practice that, and we'll see if we can maintain it. And you'll fall off and you'll get back on, and you'll fall off and you'll get back on. And that's just how it goes, as I'm sure you're probably aware of that. So let's move into that. If you want to let yourself find a comfortable way to sit as best you can. Here's my